I was travelling in Europe and a local friend casually mentioned it was 22 degrees Celsius outside. I smiled and nodded, but truthfully I had no idea what that meant for the weather. Discreetly, I ducked behind my phone to Google a Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion chart. When I saw that 22 degrees Celsius is about 72 degrees Fahrenheit, I felt both relieved and a bit embarrassed. Who knew I'd need basic grade school science on vacation? It's a daily fact for most people around the world, but I grew up only using Fahrenheit, so Celsius was like a foreign language to me. Later on, I sheepishly admitted my unit conversion detour, and my friend just laughed. They teased that Celsius is second nature to them, and they couldn't believe we Americans don't use it in daily life. It made me feel like a clueless student all over again, realizing I'd missed a memo that the rest of the world got long ago. Travel has a way of revealing these small differences in what we consider basic knowledge. My little kid once stumped me with the simplest question: why is the sky blue? He looked up at me with big, curious eyes, expecting a confident answer, and I had nothing. As an adult, I vaguely remembered it had something to do with light, but I completely blanked on the details. My pride took a small hit as I pulled out my phone and quietly Googled the answer right in front of him. It turns out it's because the atmosphere scatters sunlight, making us see a blue sky. Obvious in hindsight, I guess. I know I learned that science at some point, but it had evaporated from my brain. At least now we both learned something new, or relearned in my case. It was humbling to realize that even the most basic facts can slip away, and sometimes we parents have to learn alongside our kids. On my first road trip into Canada, I nearly had a heart attack when I saw a highway speed limit sign that read 100. I thought, no way could the limit be 100 miles per hour. For a split second I imagined Canadians zooming at NASCAR speeds. Then it clicked, with the help of a quick Google check, that the sign was in kilometers per hour, not miles. 100 kilometers per hour is only about 62 miles per hour. Perfectly normal. I felt a mix of relief and silliness wash over me once I realized my mistake, and I laughed out loud at myself. It was one of those moments I felt extremely American, in the sense that I was oblivious to the metric system in a very basic way. Not long after, I saw a sign saying the next town was 50 kilometers away, and I was already mentally translating that to about 30 miles. I guess I was learning quickly. I remember the first time I tried to boil an egg on my own. I stood there wondering, how long am I supposed to leave it in the water? It's the kind of basic cooking skill I felt I should have known, but I had absolutely no clue. After a minute of waffling, I whipped out my phone and Googled how to boil an egg. To my relief, I wasn't the first clueless person. There were tons of results with step-by-step instructions. Sure enough, those instructions spelled out something seemingly every adult but me already knew. I felt a little stupid that I needed a tutorial for boiling water and eggs. In my defense, I never really cooked much growing up. Thank you, instant ramen. Still, it was humbling to realize I was starting from square one on such a simple kitchen task. On the bright side, the egg turned out fine, and I haven't had to Google that again.
During a trip abroad, I was checking in at the airport, and the scale showed my suitcase was 23 kilograms. I froze for a moment because I had no idea whether that was under the 50-pound limit I was used to. The number 23 meant nothing to me in terms of weight, so I pulled out my phone right there in line and Googled the conversion. It turns out 23 kilograms is roughly 50.7 pounds, just a hair over the limit. I felt a mix of gratitude for the info and a bit of silliness that I needed Google to figure out something so basic. The airline agent chuckled when I admitted I was converting on the fly. Growing up with pounds, I never had to become fluent in kilograms, beyond science class. That day, I learned to keep a conversion app handy whenever I travel, so I won't feel so lost at the scale.
I was filling out a medical form for a routine checkup when I hit a question asking for my blood type. My mind went blank. I had absolutely no clue what my own blood type was. I felt a bit embarrassed that I had to leave it blank and later Google how to find out. It's one of those basic facts about yourself that you think you should know, especially as an adult. In some countries, they teach it in school or list it on IDs, but in my experience here in the US, it's not commonly known unless you've donated blood or needed a transfusion. I ended up texting my mum and digging through old paperwork to get the answer. Turns out I'm O positive. While I was relieved to finally know, I felt a little foolish that I had reached my 20s without knowing such a fundamental thing about my own body. I found a fantastic soup recipe on a UK cooking blog, but all the measurements were in metric. It called for 500 millilitres of water and 300 grams of carrots, and I just stared blankly at the instructions. How many cups is 500 millilitres, and how many carrots would 300 gram be? I had zero intuition for it. My hands were already messy with chopped veggies, yet I paused my cooking to grab my phone and Google the conversions. I learned that 500 millilitres is about 2 cups, and 300 grams of carrots is roughly 3 or 4 carrots. I felt a bit ridiculous consulting Google for something as basic as making soup. I realized I'd grown up with cups and ounces and never learnt the metric kitchen measurements that most of the world uses daily. It was humbling, but also kind of neat to pick up a new system. At least now I can tackle international recipes without feeling completely lost.
It was December 26th, and I was still in a post-Christmas haze when my British friend cheerily greeted me, "Happy Boxing Day!" I was completely puzzled. Boxing Day? I half-jokingly wondered if it was a holiday for going to boxing matches or maybe returning all the empty gift boxes from Christmas. Not wanting to sound ignorant, I just gave a polite smile and nod. Later, I sneaked off to Google what Boxing Day actually was. It turns out it's the day after Christmas, basically a big shopping holiday and day of rest in the UK and some other countries. Nothing to do with punching gloves at all. I felt a little silly for not knowing something so widely celebrated outside the US. In my defense, we just don't talk about Boxing Day back home. Now, whenever I see Boxing Day on a calendar, I chuckle at how clueless I used to be. At least I can wish my Commonwealth friends a happy 26th of December without secretly scratching my head.
I'll cringe about this forever. Back when I was a teenager, we were planning a road trip down south, and I actually asked if I needed a passport to travel to New Mexico. Yes, New Mexico, the US state right next to Arizona. In my defense, the name threw me off, and I clearly wasn't paying attention in geography class. My friends gave me the strangest looks and basically reminded me New Mexico is a US state, not a different country. Mortified, I laughed it off, but later immediately Googled it to save face, just in case. Sure enough, New Mexico is as American as apple pie. I felt unbelievably stupid for not knowing my own country's basic geography. It was a wake-up call to study the map better. Nowadays, I double-check locations on Google Maps well before I open my mouth, just to avoid any more facepalm moments like that.
While studying abroad in England, I kept hearing traffic reports on the radio about lorries on the road. At first, I thought a lorry might be some kind of British animal or code word. One day, a local friend mentioned a lorry accident on the motorway, and I finally admitted I had no clue what a lorry was. We looked at each other, and then I quickly Googled it on the spot. To my surprise and mild embarrassment, I discovered a lorry is just a truck. A big, regular truck. I felt pretty foolish that I hadn't figured it out from context clues. In hindsight, it made perfect sense. I had even seen road signs about lorries, trucks, and never connected the dots. Ever since, whenever I hear someone say lorry, I smile, remembering how baffled I once was by such a basic term.
During a trivia night at a local bar, I was asked how many stripes are on the American flag. My mind just froze, and I could feel my cheeks burning with embarrassment. I could picture the flag in my head, but I blanked on the exact number of stripes. I sheepishly guessed 11, which earned me some funny looks and was very wrong.
Later that night, my curiosity nagged at me, and I secretly Googled it under the table. Sure enough, it's 13 stripes, for the original 13 colonies, of course. The ironic thing is, I'm sure I learned that in elementary school, but it had completely slipped my mind. I felt pretty ashamed for forgetting such a basic fact about my own country's flag. That little incident motivated me to brush up on some simple facts I hadn't thought about in years, just so I won't blank out like that again.
The first time I had a Sunday roast in England, I was offered something called Yorkshire pudding. I eagerly anticipated a sweet dessert, because pudding means dessert to me, only to be served this puffy golden bread thing alongside the meat and gravy. I was so confused. I remember smiling politely while internally thinking, "This is pudding?" Afterward, I slyly Googled Yorkshire pudding to make sure I hadn't missed the actual dessert course. To my surprise, I learned that in the UK, pudding can refer broadly to dessert or, in this case, a savoury side dish made of batter. I had a good chuckle at myself for expecting chocolate pudding and instead getting a bread popover. It was a delicious lesson in how the same word can mean very different things. It still makes me laugh how something as simple as a term can cause such a mix-up for an American abroad. Now I know that not everything called pudding is what I would expect.
On my first trip to Paris, I embarrassingly hadn't learned a single French phrase. When I needed to find a restroom at a cafe, I realized I had no idea how to ask. I stood there, mind blank, feeling every bit the clueless tourist. In a panic, I pulled out my phone and quickly Googled how to say "where is the bathroom" in French. Armed with a phonetically written "où sont les toilettes," I managed to timidly ask the waiter. I'm sure my pronunciation was terrible, but he understood. He answered me in English anyway, with a polite smile, and I felt both grateful and a little ashamed. I realized I had assumed everyone would speak English, which was pretty lazy on my part. Nowadays, before traveling somewhere, I make sure to learn at least a few basic phrases so I don't have to whip out Google for something so simple. I almost made a very ill-timed phone call once. I have a close friend working in London, and I figured I'd ring her after my workday in New York, around 6 p.m. my time. I was literally dialing when a sense of doubt crept in. Was it really late over there? I quickly Googled the current time in London and saw it was past 11 p.m. Yikes! She definitely wouldn't have appreciated a midnight call from me out of the blue. I felt relieved I'd double-checked, but also a bit silly for nearly forgetting about the 5-hour time difference. It's such a basic thing to consider, but in that moment, I was just in my own little bubble. Now I always pause before calling friends abroad. I pull up the world clock on my phone to make sure I'm not about to be that person who calls at 3 a.m. their time. I was well into adulthood when I discovered I had been saying a common phrase wrong my whole life. Specifically, I always said "for all intensive purposes," thinking that was the expression. One day at work, a colleague gave me a puzzled look and gently asked if I perhaps meant "for all intents and purposes" instead. I was taken aback. Intents and purposes honestly looked weird to me at first. Sure enough, I quickly Googled it, and there it was. I'd been saying it wrong for years. Apparently, it's a pretty common mistake, but that didn't make me feel much less embarrassed. I guess I had misheard it as a kid, and the wrong version stuck in my head. Ever since that day, I've been a lot more careful with idioms and sayings. It's humbling to realize something you were so sure about can turn out to be a little off all along.
During a visit to Tokyo, I made the classic American mistake of leaving a tip at a restaurant. I put some extra yen on the table and walked out, feeling good about my meal. To my surprise, the waiter came running after me, politely insisting I take my money back. I was mortified, worried that I had somehow offended him. Later that evening, I anxiously Googled tipping in Japan and learned that tipping isn't customary there at all. In fact, it can be seen as impolite because good service is expected without extra reward. I felt so stupid for not knowing that beforehand. Tipping is second nature to me at home, so I hadn't even considered that the custom could be different elsewhere. It was a gentle reminder that what's normal in America isn't universal. Now when I travel, I always check local etiquette so I won't make the same mistake twice.
I learnt the hard way that some famous place names aren't pronounced the way they look. While in London, I proudly told a local that I planned to walk along the river Thames. They gave me a puzzled look, then gently corrected me. "Oh, you mean the river Thames." I was immediately embarrassed. I could feel my face flush as I realized my mistake. I'd only ever seen Thames written, and in my American mind it was definitely Thames. I laughed it off with them, but later that day I made sure to Google a list of other tricky place name pronunciations. No way was I going to mispronounce Edinburgh or Leicester next. It was humbling to realize I'd been saying such a basic name wrong my whole life. On the bright side, now I know, and I double-check pronunciation for famous places so I don't stick my foot in my mouth anymore.
I once had to fill out an online form that asked for my height in centimeters. I froze because I only knew my height in feet and inches, like 5'9". Centimeters? I had no clue. I tried to guesstimate for a second, but I didn't want to be wildly off, so of course I Googled it. I typed in 5 feet 9 inches to centimeters and found out I'm about 175 centimeters tall. I felt a bit foolish that I didn't already have at least a ballpark idea of my height in the metric system. People in most other countries rattle off their height in centimeters without a second thought. Meanwhile, there I was, an adult, secretly converting on a website like a kid cheating on homework. It was a small reminder of how isolated our measurement system is. At least now I remember my metric height for next time someone asks.
Driving on the Autobahn in Germany, I kept seeing big signs that said Ausfahrt at every exit. I actually thought Ausfahrt must be a gigantic city or region, since there were so many exits for it. At one point, I almost asked a local what part of Germany Ausfahrt was in, but thankfully I decided to search it on my own first. After a few puzzled miles, I pulled into a rest area and Googled Ausfahrt. Lo and behold, I discovered it simply means exit in German. I burst out laughing in my car at how ridiculous my assumption was. I felt equal parts amused and silly for not realizing it sooner. In my defense, I knew zero German at the time, but still, it seems obvious in hindsight. Now it's one of my favorite travel stories to tell, if only to highlight how lost you can be when you don't know even a single basic word in another language.
I'll admit, I was today years old when I learned that narwhals are real animals. For the longest time, I assumed narwhals were mythical creatures, like unicorns of the sea made up for cartoons and Christmas songs. One day, I saw a nature post online about narwhals and thought it was a joke. Curiosity got the better of me and I Googled, "Are narwhals real?" fully expecting a debunk. To my shock, up popped a bunch of articles confirming that yes, narwhals exist, they're a type of whale with a long tusk. I was equal parts mind-blown and embarrassed. How did I go my whole life not realizing this basic animal fact? I even double-checked another source because I was in disbelief. Now whenever narwhals come up in conversation, and they do more often than you'd think, I sheepishly admit that I once thought they were fictional until Google set me straight. The first time I drove in the UK, I had a mini panic attack as I approached a large roundabout. Back home, I'd rarely dealt with roundabouts, let alone one with multiple lanes, and now I was doing it on the left side of the road. I actually pulled over for a minute and Googled how to navigate a roundabout in UK on my phone. There I was, an American in a rental car, frantically reading a how-to on roundabout etiquette while locals zipped past me. I felt pretty ridiculous, like I should have studied up more before getting behind the wheel. But hey, driver's ed in the US never covered this scenario. Once I got the basic idea, yield to traffic already in the circle, pick a lane, signal to exit, I merged back in and made it through. I definitely felt out of my depth in what was a basic driving situation for everyone else, but I learned quickly. These days, roundabouts don't scare me. Well, not as much anyway.
This one's a bit embarrassing.
I didn't learn what that little arrow on the car's fuel gauge meant until I was in my late 20s. I was at a rental car pickup, about to drive off, when I realized I wasn't sure which side the gas tank was on. A friend saw me puzzled and pointed to the dashboard. See that arrow next to the gas pump icon? It shows the tank side. I was stunned. I had driven for over a decade and never noticed that tiny arrow. I even Googled it later to confirm, and sure enough, it's a standard feature. The arrow points to the side of the car with the fuel door. I was equal parts amazed and a little embarrassed for not knowing such a useful basic feature sooner. On the plus side, I've never again had to awkwardly lean out of the window at a gas station to check where the tank is. Now I just glance at the arrow. Boom! Problem solved. I learnt about differing traffic rules the hard way while driving in Germany. I rolled up to a red light and, out of sheer American habit, started to turn right on red. Instantly, a chorus of car horns blared behind me and I caught a couple of drivers gesturing at me, not too kindly. Startled and confused, I stopped mid-turn and just sat there flustered. Later on, I asked a local friend and then Googled it. Turns out, in Germany, you're not allowed to turn on red unless there's a specific green arrow sign. Whoops! I felt pretty stupid for assuming the rule was the same as back home. It's such a basic thing, but I had completely taken it for granted. Ever since that incident, whenever I drive abroad, I double-check the local road rules, even the obvious ones, so I don't end up learning them the hard way like that again.
When I first started working with colleagues in the UK, one of them said a project would be done in a fortnight. I nodded along, but truthfully I wasn't sure how long a fortnight was. My only association with Fortnite was the video game. Rather than admit my confusion, I covertly Googled it after the meeting. I felt a bit silly when the result popped up. A fortnight means 2 weeks. Of course, a basic term in British English, but one we almost never use in the States. I had a real, oh duh moment. I even laughed at myself for thinking of the video game first. Since then, I've picked up a lot more British lingo, but I'll never forget that humble introduction. At least now I know if a Brit says, "see you in a fortnight," they mean in 14 days, not that we're about to play an online game.
Growing up, I heard the fun fact that the Great Wall of China is the only man-made object visible from space. I carried that tidbit with me for years, feeling pretty confident about it. Then, one day, as an adult, I casually mentioned it in conversation, and a friend challenged me. Slightly defensive, I decided to Google the claim to prove I was right. Well, I wasn't. It turns out it's basically a myth. The Great Wall isn't distinctly visible to the naked eye from the moon, or even low Earth orbit without aid. I felt a mix of embarrassment and betrayal. Thanks a lot, childhood trivia books. How could I have believed and repeated that for so long without checking? It was a needed reminder that even basic facts you learn as a kid can be wrong. Now I'm far more likely to verify things with a quick search before parroting them as truth.
On my first solo trip to Europe, I constantly found myself Googling currency conversions. I remember standing in a street market in Italy, eyeing a leather bag priced at €50. I had no idea if that was a good deal or not in dollars. I discreetly pulled out my phone and converted it, about $55 at the time. Not bad. Another time in London, I nearly had a heart attack seeing a dinner bill of £80, until a quick Google told me it was roughly $100. Still pricey, but not as horrifying as I first thought. Each time, I felt a bit naive for not being able to do at least a rough conversion in my head. It's a basic travel skill, really. I've gotten a little better at estimating exchange rates over time, but I still keep a currency app handy. No shame in double-checking. It beats getting ripped off or panicking over nothing.
I once tried to get into cricket after making some friends from India. They were excitedly chatting about runs, wickets, and overs during a match, and I was utterly lost. Determined not to feel completely clueless, I discreetly pulled up a Cricket Rules for Beginners guide on my phone while we watched. I learned in real time that a wicket isn't just a set of stumps. It also means getting a batsman out. An over is a set of 6 balls bowled, and so on. I was basically cramming sports rules via Google on the fly. I felt like a student who hadn't done his homework, frantically studying during class. It was humbling to realize I didn't understand a sport that millions of people consider basic knowledge. My friends found it funny and helped fill in the gaps, but I was quietly glad I'd at least skimmed the basics online. Now I can actually enjoy a cricket match, though I still double-check weird terms on my phone sometimes.
When I travelled through Spain by train, I quickly realised I wasn't fluent in using the 24-hour clock. My ticket said the departure was at 16:30, and for a moment I panicked, thinking I'd missed 6:30 something. It took me a beat to remember that 16:30 means 4:30 p.m. To be sure, I double-checked the math on my phone, just to avoid missing the train by an hour. I felt a bit sheepish for needing to do that conversion on the spot. Back home, I almost never use military time, so seeing 16:30 or 2200 isn't intuitive for me. Everyone around me seemed to instinctively understand it, and there I was, counting on my fingers, like, okay, 16 minus 12 equals 4. It was a small thing, but it made me aware of how even reading a clock can become a mini culture shock. These days, I'm better at it, but you can bet I still triple-check my train times whenever they're in 24-hour format.
I remember trying to mail a postcard to a friend in France and realizing I had no idea how to format an international address. The address she gave me had the postal code before the city and a 2-letter region code at the end. It looked so foreign to my eyes. I wrote it out as best as I could, but it still felt wrong. Before sending it off, I decided to Google how to address mail to France, just to be safe. Sure enough, I had mixed up the order of the lines. I felt a bit foolish that I couldn't even address an envelope without instructions. It's the simplest thing, yet outside of the US, the format can be quite different. After a quick correction, and making sure to write France in big letters at the bottom, I sent the postcard on its way. It was a small reminder that even basic tasks like addressing mail can require relearning in a global context.
I once went to a pub in London to watch a football match, soccer for me, with some local friends. They kept using terms that went right over my head. At half-time, one of them said, "Well, it's 0-0 so far," and I just nodded while secretly clueless. 0-0. I guessed it went 0-0, but I wasn't 100% sure. I discreetly Googled it under the table. Confirmed, 0 means 0. I also saw quick explanations for other words I'd heard, like how the field is a pitch and the game is a match, not just a game. I felt a bit like an alien trying to learn the language. It's funny because it's all English, but the lingo was so different that I was lost on basic things. My friends were cool about it and translated some commentary for me, but I was glad I did a little on-the-spot research. By the end of the match, I was saying 0-0 like I'd known it all along, even though I totally hadn't an hour prior.
In my early days working with an international team, I nearly missed an important meeting because of a date format mix-up. I saw an email scheduling a call for 05/06/2022. Naturally, I read that as May 6th, 2022 and planned accordingly. The day before what I thought was the meeting, a colleague asked why I hadn't shown up to the call that had already happened on 5/6/2022, which they meant as 5th of June. My jaw dropped. I quickly Googled date format UK versus US and felt a wave of realization and embarrassment wash over me. In much of the world, 05/06/2022 means 5th of June, not May 6th like we'd interpret in the US. I had known this in theory, but apparently it didn't stick when it mattered. I felt so silly for not double-checking something so basic. Since that incident, I always clarify dates when they're written as numbers. It's a simple thing, but assuming everyone formats dates the same way could really trip you up.
I needed to wire some money to a friend in Europe once, and he sent me his bank details, including something called an IBAN number. I looked at this long string of letters and numbers and thought, what on earth do I do with this?
Here in the US, we use routing and account numbers, and I had never seen an IBAN before. I ended up Googling how to use IBAN for wire transfer to figure it out. It turns out an IBAN, International Bank Account Number, is a standard bank code used pretty much everywhere except, well, the US. I felt a bit ignorant that I'd never heard of it until that moment, considering its basic banking info abroad. The good news is I managed to enter it correctly and the transfer went through. But it was one of those eye-opening moments where I realized how living in the American system had left me unaware of an international basic. I certainly know about IBANs now. Better late than never.
The first time my car battery died, I realized I had no idea how to jumpstart a car. I had the jumper cables and another car willing to help, but I was suddenly unsure about the proper order of connecting the clamps, which color goes where and in what sequence. Rather than wing it and potentially fry something, I whipped out my phone and Googled how to jumpstart a car. There I was in a parking lot, hunched over my phone, reading a step-by-step guide on a very basic automotive skill. I felt pretty sheepish. I mean, this is car ownership 101, something I probably should have learned when I first got the car. With Google's help, I got the engine started and thankfully didn't shock myself. After that incident, I actually practiced it a couple more times in my driveway, just so I wouldn't have to rely on the internet if it happened again. It was a reminder that sometimes adulting means admitting you don't know something basic and quickly learning it.
I was years old when I discovered I had been using a can opener wrong my whole life. One lazy afternoon, I stumbled on a viral post about things you'd been doing wrong and saw a video of someone opening a can by clamping the opener horizontally on the top rather than vertically on the side. I thought, wait, what? I immediately grabbed my can opener and a can of soup to try it. Lo and behold, it worked like a charm. The lid came off clean with no sharp edges. I literally Googled multiple sources to confirm this wasn't some elaborate prank. I felt equal parts amazed and stupid. For decades, I struggled with jagged can lids, and it turns out the proper technique was there all along as a basic instruction. In my defense, the way I was doing it did get the can open eventually. But still, discovering such a simple kitchen hack so late was humbling. Now I happily evangelize the correct can opener method to friends, so they don't have to wait as long as I did to learn.
I vividly remember the day I learned I'd been mispronouncing the word epitome. I had only ever seen it written in books and always read it in my head as epitome, rhyming with home. Then one day in college, I heard a classmate say epitome during a discussion, and I was like, hold on, that's the same word? I felt my face flush as it dawned on me that I'd been mentally saying it wrong for years. I quickly Googled the pronunciation later, just to be absolutely sure, and yep, I had been way off. I was equal parts enlightened and embarrassed. It's humbling to realize a word you thought you knew had never actually rolled off your tongue correctly. Since then, whenever I encounter a new or tricky word, I hit the audio pronunciation on Google. I'd rather learn it right the first time than have an embarrassing revelation years down the road.
Not too long ago, I found myself Googling a basic math question that made me question my adulting skills. I was out to lunch with two friends, and when the bill came, we wanted to split it 3 ways and add an 18% tip. For some reason, my brain just short-circuited trying to do that on the spot. After a moment of blankly staring at the receipt, I sheepishly opened the calculator on my phone, essentially Googling the answer to figure it out. As I was doing it, I had this thought, seriously? I can't calculate a simple split and tip without help? It's the kind of mental math I learned in school but clearly lost practice in. I felt a bit silly that something so basic required digital assistance. My friends didn't mind at all. We got the amount right down to the cent. But it did motivate me to brush up on doing quick math in my head. I'd rather not feel so reliant on technology for such simple calculations. You'd think I'd have basic geography terms down by now, but nope. I recently had to Google which is latitude and which is longitude.
I was trying to enter GPS coordinates for a hiking trail and suddenly blanked on which one runs horizontal versus vertical. I stood there muttering to myself, latitude. Latitude goes up, or is it latitude flat? None of my half-remembered mnemonics felt reliable. Finally, I gave in and pulled up Google. Sure enough, latitude lines run east-west, horizontal, and longitude lines run north-south, vertical. Oh right, it's lat is flat, as the saying goes. I had a flashback to grade school geography and wondered how I managed to forget something so basic. I felt a bit sheepish relearning a fact most 11-year-olds know. It's funny how knowledge fades when you don't use it. On the bright side, I've got it locked in again now. Latitude is flat, longitude is long. Hopefully for good this time.
While living in Italy for a semester, I had a comical struggle with the washing machine in my apartment. The dials and labels were all in Italian, and the water temperatures were listed in Celsius, accompanied by mysterious little symbols. I remember loading my clothes, then staring at the control panel utterly perplexed. What on earth is 40 degrees Cotone? Do I turn it to 60 degrees? I finally pulled out my phone and Googled the model's manual and also looked up some European laundry symbols. It turns out Cotone means cotton and the numbers are the recommended water temperature in Celsius. Basically, the machine was telling me the cotton cycle runs at 40 degrees Celsius. I felt a bit foolish needing to research how to do laundry, something I'd done countless times at home. In that moment, I was relearning a basic chore from scratch. After a couple of washes and only one mildly shrunken shirt, I got the hang of it. It taught me that even the simplest household task isn't so simple in a new environment. Thank goodness for internet manuals and translation, or I'd still be staring at that washer dial.
During my first trip outside the US, I encountered a funny hiccup trying to call home. I was in Europe and needed to phone my mum back in the States. I dialed her number, as I always would, and nothing happened, just dead air. I tried again, still no ring. I started panicking, thinking my phone or SIM card wasn't working. Then it dawned on me, maybe I had to enter some kind of country code. Honestly, I wasn't even sure what the US country code was. Spoiler, it's +1. Cue me Googling how to call US from Europe in the middle of a plaza. The instructions were embarrassingly straightforward. Dial +1, then the rest of the number. Duh. I punched in +1 before my mum's number, and voila, it started ringing immediately. I laughed at myself afterwards. It's such a basic thing, but I'd never had to think about it before. Now I know, when calling internationally, always remember the country code, and that the US is +1. Live and learn.
I have a confession. I once cheated at a pub trivia night using Google, and I've never felt more paradoxically stupid. A question came up about naming all the planets in order, something I definitely learned in elementary school, but suddenly couldn't fully recall under pressure. I blanked on Neptune. Desperate to impress my team, I slyly searched for the answer on my phone under the table and gave the correct lineup. We got the point, but I felt a pang of guilt and embarrassment. Here I was, an adult who couldn't trust myself to list the planets without Googling it. It was a wake-up call that maybe I rely on my phone a bit too much for basic trivia I used to know. After that night, I actually reviewed a bunch of simple facts, like rememorizing the planets, just to re-strengthen those mental muscles. I still love having instant information at my fingertips, but I'd rather not feel lost without it when it comes to the basics.